Creation is for human beings, not the other way around. That is not a flat relationship. It is not sacred. It is not more important than the human race. One actually is designed to serve the other. Human beings were set over creation. They were not made equal to creation. Okay, and that opens up this question of, okay, they're set over creation. There's a question of dominion and authority and subjugation and ruling. And Jordan Peterson would be delighted to know that there's hierarchy. Even in paradise, some people got that there's even hierarchy in paradise. There's order, there is government, there is a system of authority. So, there is that authority with respect to the natural world, the environment. So we're straight into a hot topic of our time. The vexed issue of creation care, as some people call it. Stewardship, you might hear. Some people make the mistake that maybe Genesis mentions the word stewardship. It doesn't quite. Environmentalism, climate change. Have a look at the words that are used, just to get the sense. So it says, have dominion. It says, subdue. Some translations will also include rule over. There is also a command here to fill the earth. And then you have cultivate and tend. What does it all mean? One, man and woman are set over creation. That means, and it also means, it therefore means this. Creation is for human beings, not the other way around. That is not a flat relationship. Creation is for human beings. It is not sacred. It is not more important than the human race. One actually is designed to serve the other. Secondly, therefore, in the same vein, creation is a resource for our use. Notice the phrase God says, I have given you every green plant for food, etc. And then we're going to read in Genesis 8 a bit later on, and of course it expands out to the animal kingdom, but also in Genesis 2 it's talking about the availability of the gold and the bdellium, whatever that is, and the onyx stone and things like that. There's resources here. There's things in creation that are there to serve the needs of the human race. So here's an important point. Using the resources that are offered by creation, taking them and using them for human prosperity and dominion, etc., is not wrong. Okay? It is not in itself wrong. To dig a lump of coal out of the ground is not a moral violation. To cut down a tree is not an immoral act. Creation's not sacred. These resources, God actually knew that in order to exist on this earth, we would need resources. And He has made those resources available for our living, our sustenance, and the dominion mandate. Here's the other thing. Creation is to be subdued. And I'm going to say just a little bit more on this in a second. But the meaning of subdue, it can vary from anything from bringing under control. By the way, that's what we've done right here, isn't it? We're not sitting out in a paddock. We've subdued this little plot of earth, or we haven't. Whoever the bright spark who made this place has subdued this bit of earth, made it suitable for such an event as this. With my complexion, I wouldn't last very long outdoors all day. We don't have to worry about that. So it means to bring under control, to dominate, and to make subservient. Again, it's that hierarchical thing. Now there's that side of the coin, and there's some really important principles there. There is a tempering, a softening of that in Genesis chapter 2, which is worth noting. And the softening or the tempering of that command to subdue and to take is this command to cultivate. The idea of cultivating something, it seems to preclude the idea that you would sort of pillage or that you would take to the point of destruction. It seems to preclude the idea of abuse, okay? If you cultivate land, what you're doing is you're making it productive. It's a softening of this command to take. Obviously, excesses are not being contemplated here. And there have been times in history when there have been great excesses. I will never get over the mindset of, colonial types a while ago where they'd be like, hey, whale blubber's really good for candles. Let's kill all the whales. You just sit there and go, that's excess. It's madness. It's taking this just too far. Or indeed, buffalo in America, just hunted to within an inch of extinction. Or killing white rhinoceroses. What for? Ivory, for heaven's sake. It's just madness. It's wrong. That kind of abuse is not what is being talked about here. And it would seem to be precluded, which you can imagine for obvious reasons. Wholesale deforestation would be in the same category and so forth. Now, I said before, I'll make a comment about an example of subduing creation. Back up in Brisbane, I actually live in Canberra, despite me banging on about Brisbane all the time. But back up in Brisbane, I do have a granny flat, which I had built on the back of my brother-in-law and sister's place so that I have somewhere to stay when I'm up there. And I got to tell you, that granny flat is in just a patch of dirt. But that granny flat is air-conditioned. It is nicely furnished. It has some soundproofing as well because the kids are noisy. And sometimes when I'm up there, I want to rest and sleep in because the work is exhausting. Clean water comes out of the taps when you turn them on. There's a roof over it for shade. I mentioned that shade's rather important for me. We wouldn't last very long. There's the garden even, It's not just out of control. Things are planted in neat little rows. The weeds are all plucked out. Fertilizer goes down. What's happening here? Well, that's been made suitable and hospitable for life. There is a sense in that activity that creation's been subdued. And there's a lot of enterprise that goes into the production of the timber that's been used in that goes into the production of the steel that's used in that. That's coking coal from Queensland and iron ore from Western Australia and things like that are used to create the materials that we need to do these sorts of things. And what happens? Creation is serving human beings in a constructive and a proper way. There is nothing wrong in principle with any of those things to bring into subjection creation for this reason. Humans, therefore, we're not the cancer on the earth. We are set over the earth, and the earth is a supply for us, and we are properly subduing it in order to enhance life without abusing it, without pillaging and destroying in a reckless fashion. And there's another piece of this whole puzzle that needs to come together, which you will find in Genesis chapter 8. I cheat a little bit. I say creation's blueprints, but we kind of stray outside of creation a couple of times. But it all starts in creation. Genesis chapter 8 is, I have found, a singularly helpful passage. In verse 20, it talks about Noah coming out of the ark. It says, Noah built an altar to the Lord and took some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird, offered the burnt offering on the altar. When the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, notice this, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done. And here you go, full stop, new sentence. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. This brings us back to the perennial issue these days that we are creatures, not creators. There are things in our control, and there are things we are expressly told, it's okay, God's got it. Now, there are things in our control, but those things do not include the seasons. Those things do not include cold and heat and harvest time and the production of the earth and all those sorts of things. God has said, that's in my hands. I will sort that out. That means Greta Thunberg is wrong. The world will not end. That is in God's hands also. I could quote John MacArthur. He says, if you think we're messing up the planet, you wait till Jesus does with it. Till you see what Jesus does with it when he comes back. Now, there's two schools of thought on that, I know, but it's still a bit funny. Greta Thunberg is wrong about the end of the world and also about the cataclysmic, life-extincting effect of macro changes in weather patterns and climate. Okay? Al Gore was wrong. And really, we're routinely getting too big for our boots in so many of these things, and I think it really is a reflection of a growth in just rank godlessness in our society. When God is gone, you get anxious about a lot of stuff that you used to know that was in God's hands. And I do think people are incredibly anxious about so much these days as well, because if the world is just chance random collisions of stuff and it's your job to dodge all the trouble, man, that's a pretty anxious existence. If that's really what's in the back of your mind all the time, I don't know, I wouldn't be very happy about that either. But Christians don't spook as easily on these sorts of things. And people get very angry about it because Christians just know, well, it's in God's hands. And it's the same with the climate factor. When you take God out of the picture, everything becomes anxiety-inducing. Everything is up to you all of a sudden. I mean, just to begin to think of the complexity and the force of the globe's climate systems, it's phenomenal. I mean, goodness me, all you need to do is stand in a big gust of wind that blows you off your feet. And there's so much is so far outside of your control, let alone the more intense stuff that goes on. This is in God's hands. And this is a great principle of assurance. But really, it's not far removed from what you can see and perceive and know from studying the science. The thing that they insist that you don't confront is that, for example, it's been much hotter in the past than it is today, with no emissions. They insist that you don't confront that it's been much colder than it is today, that it has been much, whatever, fill in the blank, disasters and all the rest of it, have been worse and better in the past. These changes are part and parcel of living on planet Earth. Appreciating this fact, the Earth is a fallen Earth, and therefore these things are not perfect, and these things do come and bring destruction and cause havoc and all the rest of it. The creation is groaning. It has been subjected to futility, says Romans 8. However, that does not mean that God has left it. That does not mean that God has allowed it, like deists believe God wound it up like a clock and walked away. He hasn't walked away from it. Colossians says very clearly that he existed prior to all things, and in him all things hold together and endure. Colossians chapter 1, verse 17. He hasn't left it. He's still intimately interested in it. And the promise of Noah, it doesn't have an expiry date on it until the return of Christ. So, conclusion. There is a tension here, which we need to appreciate. And it's a tension of, identifying what is, what's sticking to our knitting and letting God stick to his knitting, to put it one way. For example, I can see and appreciate a lot of stuff that people do to improve the environment. There are people who are dedicated to researching and building technologies that clean the oceans out, get the plastics out of the ocean and all that kind of stuff, and stop the destruction that's being caused to wildlife and other systems as a result of that. That's proper and good. There's no problem with any of that. Or indeed the preservation of national parks, or the creation of cleaner cities, the removal of smog from the air and all this kind of stuff. Or indeed just keeping a weather eye on resource availability and coming up with either new technologies to get more or new technologies that prepare us for the next round when a certain resource might run out or run lower. I can appreciate all those things. That's us doing what we reasonably ought to do to look after the place. But of course, as soon as you start getting up into the overall paradigm, as soon as you start getting up into the paradigm of this climate system and the end of the world kind of stuff, you're on dangerous ground. Straight away, you're in a world where, God reigns. And they very often come along with models, and they say, this is what the model says, and the model always turns out to be wrong. And models assume certain things will continue the same, but God's in control, and they never do continue the same. So the overall paradigm, don't get too big for your boots. It's in God's hands. But the other things I can completely appreciate.